Trump's trade war isn't just about tariffs. It's about the complete chaos and confusion that's destroying businesses on both sides of the Canada-US border. And the most shocking part, even companies that followed all the rules are getting crushed by a system so broken that nobody knows what they're doing. The story begins with what should have been a success story. Canada currently has the best deal of any of the United States trading partners in the world. 85% of our trade with the United States has no tariffs, according to Prime Minister Mark Carney. But don't tell that to Patrick Fulop, a Quebec businessman whose experience reveals the nightmare reality behind Trump's so-called deal-making. Fulop runs Grappling Smarty, a company that makes specialized training equipment for MMA fighters. He went through the process of becoming compliant with the Canada-US-Mexico agreement, CUSMA, the trade deal that replaced NAFTA in 2020. 75% of his sales go to US customers. He did everything right, followed every rule, and got his CUSMA certification. But Trump's chaotic trade policy turned his compliance into worthless paper. The numbers are absolutely staggering. How they've been applied has been wildly arbitrary. Fulop shared invoices showing the insanity of Trump's system. One invoice charged him $66 for a $250 product using one set of tariffs. Another invoice for the exact same product charged $555 using different tariff codes. We're talking about the same product, same value, but completely different treatment depending on which bureaucrat happened to process it that day. We are talking 100 to 200%. I think on average it's 150% we have been paying on those orders, Fulop explained. This isn't just bad policy, it's economic warfare against businesses that trusted the system. Even Canadian companies that are CUSMA compliant are getting hit by US tariffs. The chaos and uncertainty around the American trade policy has created layer upon layer of bureaucracy that is adding costs and time to every shipment. But here's where it gets even worse. The problem isn't just the tariffs themselves, it's the complete breakdown of any coherent system. It's the vast new compliance requirements they have to meet, and the bureaucracy which is just as confused as the businesses. That's costing time and money when businesses can ill afford to lose either. Scott Lincecum from the Cato Institute in Washington explains the nightmare that Trump has created. Since US President Donald Trump started imposing tariffs last winter, he says companies have had to sift through various types of tariffs imposed at different rates for different countries and different products. Now, it's a lot more complicated because the product might have not just a reciprocal tariff rate, but a Section 232 rate. There's a country rate. There's now 100 different country rates. Think about that for a moment. Trump has created a system with 100 different country rates, multiple types of tariffs that can be stacked on top of each other, and nobody, not the businesses, not the brokers, not even the shipping companies, knows how to navigate it. And in some cases, those tariffs are meant to be stacked, that is, added on top of each other. The shipping companies that accept the product in the US are ultimately responsible for making sure the right tariff is paid. So some experts say those companies are simply charging the maximum rate and letting the exporter sort out whether they should get a refund. This is where Trump's incompetence really shows. Instead of creating a clear, predictable system, he's built a bureaucratic monster that punishes everyone. America. Importers, Canadian exporters, and ultimately American consumers who pay higher prices. The shipping companies, faced with criminal penalties for getting it wrong, are just charging the maximum rate and letting businesses figure it out later. It's a system designed by chaos for chaos. The scale of Trump's trade war is unprecedented. On February 1st, 2025, a trade war between the US, Canada, and Mexico began when the US President Donald Trump signed orders imposing near-universal tariffs on goods from the two countries entering the United States. The order called for 25% tariffs on all imports from Mexico and all imports from Canada except for oil and energy, which would be taxed at 10%. But even this supposedly clear structure became a mess in implementation. By August, UMP escalated further. Trump has threatened to slap a 35% tariff on all Canadian goods on August 1, but many goods remain exempt if they are CUSMA compliant. The problem? The exemption process is so convoluted and arbitrary that even compliant companies can't rely on it. Now, here's where the legal battle gets interesting. Lower courts have already ruled that most of Trump's tariffs are illegal, finding that the president overstepped his authority since Congress, not the White House, has constitutional power over tariffs and trade policy. However, Trump could ask the Republican-controlled Congress to grant him the authority to maintain these tariffs, providing a legislative solution to what courts see as executive overreach.
We have seen, at least in the string of victories that the White House has racked up from the Supreme Court, that it looks as though at least 6 of the conservative justices are prepared at least to rule in Donald Trump's favor. Now, we don't know at this time, but based on what we have seen, Donald Trump has won injunctive relief 17 out of the 23 times that he has brought emergency cases before the Supreme Court. Now, just to give some perspective, the Biden administration did not actually seek that many emergency cases before the Supreme Court in their entire 4 years in office. Already we have seen the Trump administration seek that relief more than the Biden administration in just 7 months in office. So what we're seeing here is now there is a growing concern that the Supreme Court is acting more like the legal arm of President Donald Trump than in a third branch of government where they're an actual check. In addition to that, we are learning that there is growing tension and friction between the lower courts, who are being constantly overruled by the Supreme Court as a result of these cases that are continuing to be brought. And also, very quickly, Marcia, I'll also add that what we're also seeing is when the Supreme Court takes up emergency cases, they don't necessarily have to provide a justification why they ruled the way they did. They could just simply rule on an up or down vote from the 9 justices, which also makes it very difficult to understand or ascertain how, in fact, the justices came up with the rulings that we're seeing that they're making, at least on behalf of the president.
The U.S. Constitution gives Congress the power to impose tariffs, not the president through emergency powers. Trump is actually the first president to ever attempt using emergency powers for tariffs, making these actions unconstitutional and an abuse of power that Congress never intended to grant.
Yeah, and really simply, the founding document in the United States is our Constitution, and the Constitution specifically says that the power to tariff rests with Congress. So that is their power. Congress gave some of that power to the president under really specific laws. The one law that they didn't give the president that power is under his emergency powers. And so President Trump is the first president to ever use this emergency power in an attempt to implement tariffs, and he did it in a way that is contrary and at odds with all of the other statutes and laws that were passed by Congress to do tariffs. So it's pretty simple. It's an abuse of an emergency power in a way that Congress didn't intend, and therefore all of those actions are unconstitutional.
But Trump has a secret weapon, the Supreme Court. Political analyst Eric Ham reveals that Trump has an exceptional track record with emergency docket cases before the Supreme Court, winning 17 out of 23 cases.
Cases going before the Supreme Court. In fact, he's won 17 of 23, and we know one is still pending, and a ruling just came down recently. So if this case is any indication of what we can expect in terms of success or failure, the president has a very good chance of actually getting a verdict in his favor in this case. And to be clear, if you compare what Donald Trump has done going through emergency dockets to get the case, to take these cases up quickly versus, say, what the last administration did, Donald Trump has brought more emergency docket cases than the Biden administration did in the entire 4 years. Donald Trump has brought more in the first 7 months in office than the Biden administration did in 4 years, and already he's notched a massive win streak.
And with a conservative leaning court, what do you think the odds are here?
There's a very good chance, at least based on what we're seeing from these 17 cases that Donald Trump has won already, that the court will likely rule in his favor and overturn a lower court ruling that these tariffs are, in fact, justifiable and will be allowed to keep in place.
He notes that Trump has brought more emergency cases in his first 7 months than the Biden administration did in 4 years. With the conservative-leaning court, Trump has strong odds of overturning the lower court ruling. Meanwhile, the White House continues to defend these policies with misleading statistics. The White House spokesperson claims that inflation fears have not materialized, citing CPI inflation meeting or beating market expectations for 6 consecutive months. She points to 3.3% GDP growth, rising wages, and increased consumer spending. The spokesperson even characterizes the inherited economy as an absolute mess that they are working to fix.
The president is committed to his policies because his policies are working, Christian. And there have been a lot of people fear-mongering about inflation in this room, but it just has not come to fruition. On a monthly basis, CPI inflation has now come in at or below the market's expectation for 6 consecutive months, every month that President Trump has been in office. Overall, inflation has run at a 1.9% average pace in the president's first 6 months in office. I would have told all of you that in January, you would not have believed me, but those are the facts and those are the numbers. And we also see many other positive signs in economic indicators like real GDP. In the second quarter, it was revised up to 3.3%. That beat the market's expectation. We know there's a capital spending boom right now, which we know is one of the greatest economic indicators of job growth. We know wages are increasing at a far faster pace than they were under the previous administration. We see productivity in the second quarter was also revised up to a strong 3.3%. In total, industrial production, factory output also surged. All of this means the economy is moving, people are working, people are spending money. You look at consumer spending, that is also ticking up and in the right direction.
But let's look at the real impact on the ground. The CUSMA exemption should be straightforward. If your goods are CUSMA compliant, they qualify for tariff-free access. Goods that do not meet CUSMA requirements are subject to a 35% tariff. But Trump's administration has made the process so bureaucratic and unpredictable that compliance means nothing. In general terms, any product made in Canada has the potential to be considered CUSMA compliant. However, the exporter has to jump through some hoops and deal with some paperwork to prove enough of the product actually comes from Canada to qualify. The rules require that generally 60 to 75% of a good must come from within North America to be tariff-free. But here's the cruel irony. Even companies that meet these requirements are getting hammered because Trump's bureaucracy can't properly implement his own policies. Laura Dawson from the Future Borders Coalition warns that it can be painstaking and time-consuming to show that a product meets those rules of origin, but it's becoming the new reality for Canadian exporters. It's something businesses are going to have to accept, that if they want to do business with the United States, they're going to have to prove compliance. The economic impact is devastating. The tariffs amount to an average tax increase of nearly $300 per U.S. household in 2025. In total, the imposed tariffs would reduce market income by 1.5% in 2026 and amount to an average tax increase per U.S. household of $1,300 in 2025 and $1,600 in 2026. This isn't just hurting Canadian businesses, it's a massive tax on American families. In 2025, Trump's imposed and scheduled tariffs will increase federal tax revenues by $172.3 billion, or 0.57% of GDP, making the tariffs the largest tax hike since 1993. Think about that. Trump, who campaigned on tax cuts, has imposed the largest tax increase in over 30 years. And it's falling hardest on working families who can least afford it. The chaos extends beyond individual businesses. Canada has been forced to retaliate, creating even more uncertainty. The Canadian government imposed retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods 3 times since the trade war began, including counter tariffs on $60 billion worth of U.S. consumer goods, and additional tariffs on U.S. autos, steel, and aluminum. But even Canada's response has been more measured and strategic than Trump's scattershot approach. Prime Minister Carney eventually tried to de-escalate. Canada will remove all tariffs on goods from the United States that are covered by the Canada-US-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, by September 1, Prime Minister Mark Carney announced. This was a strategic move to show good faith, but Trump's response revealed his true intentions. U.S. Ambassador Pete Hoekstra's comments exposed Trump's bad faith. Ambassador to C. Anada Pete Hoekstra says Canada is jeopardizing the future of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, also known as USMCA, on free trade due to Canadian counter-tariffs on certain American products. Canada is the country that has pulled the rug out from USMCA, Hoekstra said. This is classic Trump projection. Blame others for the chaos you created. The reality is that they also started putting tariffs on CUSMA products. We haven't done that, but Canada has decided that's fair game. We will call into question CUSMA. Back in March, Ottawa placed a 25% tariff on $29.8 billion in U.S. products, including some imports that fall under the free trade agreement, such as orange juice, motorcycles, and appliances. But this was a direct response to Trump's escalation, not the cause of it. The business community is in despair. Trade lawyer Mark Warner warns about the criminal penalties involved. He's also questioned whether every company that claims it has been CUSMA certified actually meets the criteria. With criminal penalties for fraudulent compliance, I don't think the logistics firms want to assume any of the risk, said Warner. So companies are stuck between impossible compliance requirements and the risk of criminal prosecution. For Patrick Fulop, the human cost is clear. He's covering the tariff costs for existing orders, but doubled his price to cover future orders. Meantime, he's bolstering his domestic marketing and trying to find new customers in other markets. But he's mostly frustrated that the CUSMA compliance he worked so hard to secure doesn't seem to be worth very much right now. This is the reality of Trump's America First trade policy, chaos that hurts everyone. American consumers pay higher prices, Canadian businesses face arbitrary treatment, and the integrated North American economy that took decades to build is being torn apart by incompetence and vindictiveness. The most damning indictment comes from Ontario Premier Doug Ford, who warned that at any given time, President Trump, not that he even follows the rules, he could pull the carpet out from underneath us on CUSMA tomorrow with one signature. This captures the essence of dealing with Trump. Nothing is reliable, nothing is predictable, and chaos is the only constant. The tragedy is that this didn't have to happen. CUSMA was supposed to provide certainty and stability for North American trade. Instead, Trump has turned it into a weapon of economic warfare, punishing allies and creating the very uncertainty that businesses fear most. As we look ahead, the prospects are grim. But of course, just as easily as he granted the exemption back in March, Trump could pull the plug on it at any time. If that exemption goes away, we're in an Armageddon scenario, warns one expert. Trump's tariff chaos isn't just bad policy, it's a systematic destruction of the rules-based trading system that has underpinned North American prosperity for decades. Companies like Grappling Smarty, which did everything right, are paying the price for Trump's incompetence. And ultimate, it's American consumers and workers who will suffer the most from this self-inflicted economic wound. This is what happens when chaos meets policy, when vindictiveness replaces strategy, and when a president treats international trade like a reality TV show. The damage will take years to repair, assuming Trump's successors even want to try.